Good morning, good morning, good morning, LinkedIn Live. We are live. Gosh, this has been a popular one. So let me just adjust my camera here. I've been busy printing out my notes and things to make sure that we get this right. So for this month's kind of like inclusion bite size, I thought I would do something on the 4-day work week because it's been so popular. And what I'm going to basically do today is I am breaking down the report about the UK pilot. So we're going to get into it, but basically there have been other global studies. So if you've been looking at this for a while, you'll know that Iceland in their public sector, not Iceland the supermarket, Iceland the country in their public sector trialled this and have stuck with it. This is going back a couple of years. And other companies in other countries have also trialled this, but I'm going to be focusing on the UK pilot that's been reported on in the last few weeks of 61 companies. So that's what we are going to get into. So let's do this because there's a lot to cover, and I'm going to try and get it all done before 9 o'clock. If there is anything that I don't cover that you'd like to know more about, please do just get in touch with me, send me a DM or something. Because yeah, as I say, there's a lot to get through, hence why I've got slides. You've actually got slides today. Right, okay, so let's get into it. So what are we going to cover then? Oh, that's on one of the last slides already. Right, the joys of LinkedIn Live. Right, so I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction to the UK pilot in terms of, what was the scope, who was included. There were some companies that dropped out, and I'm going to, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. So I'm going to talk about companies that dropped out. Why did they drop out? We're going to talk about preparation because actually that was really key to the success of this. And so what were the steps that companies took to prepare? Efficiencies, process improvements, how we work, etc., was a massive part of the success of this. So we're going to get into that. And then obviously we're going to talk about the results. And I don't just mean the results in terms of the employee well-being and all that stuff, which has been widely reported. I also want to talk about things like the productivity, revenue, etc., what happened. And then finally, we're going to look at the risks and the drawbacks. So as I said, not everybody wanted to stick with it. Not everybody that even signed up to the pilot actually then carried on with the study. So it'd be really interesting to understand why that was, and potentially if this is something that you're looking at, what are the things that you need to be aware of. So good morning, Rasha. Hope you are well. Thank you for joining. If you've got any comments, any bits of feedback or any specific questions maybe for your company, please do put those in the chat. My background, so although I do lots of things at the moment, I do some D&I consulting and I do some board work. My background is transformation. So I used to work on big transformation programs and projects where I used to lead big transformation programs in some global organizations, like Tesco, National Grid, other ones. So I know what this looks like in terms of trying to deliver big change and process change and technology change and all of those sorts of things, which I was surprised actually when I started to dig in how much of this was dependent on things like process change and also technology. So, this isn't the sort of thing where you can just pick up one day and say, right, next week we're going to a 4-day week. Okay, there's a lot of prep that went into it. So let's get into the content then. So just a bit of background: who, what, when, where, why, how. And we're talking specifically again about the UK pilot. If you want to know more about it, obviously you've got the websites, the 4-day week website, you've got the global one, and then you've got the 4-day week campaign, which was specifically for the UK. But the UK pilot was the biggest sort of like pilot in terms of, numbers of companies. So 61 UK companies took part in the pilot. 2,900 employees and a real range of companies actually, because one of the things that obviously a lot of people ask is, well, is it going to work in manufacturing? Is it going to work in construction? Is it going to work in call centres? Whatever it might be. So 61 companies across a range. It's fair to say that most of them were marketing and advertising, and professional services. That was like the bulk of it. They accounted for almost like sort of just over 30% of the companies. And then you've got charities and non-profits, and then a mixture of sort of admin, IT and telco, educational service, finance and insurance, health and social care. So a real mixture, but you have got some construction, you have got some engineering. Okay, so a real mixture. Mainly small companies, it's fair to say. So 2/3 of the companies involved have got 25 or fewer employees. 22% of the companies have got 50 or more, and there was actually one of the companies has got 1,000 staff. Some of the companies that are quoted on the website, you can go and see who was involved. But Atom Bank was quoted, and then Awin as well. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. AWIN, Awin was one of the companies. In terms of who it involved. So some of the experts that are doing this, it's research teams from Cambridge University, Boston College, the UK 4-Day Week campaign, which is run by 4-Day Week Global, and then a research organisation called Autonomy, who actually are the ones that have pulled together this detailed report on the UK. So that's who is involved. So what do we mean by a 4-day week? What do we mean when we say a 4-day week? So first of all, just to clarify, people still get paid for 5 days. Okay, so your pay gets maintained at 100%. But the phrase that's used is employees need to have a meaningful reduction in work time. So if you imagine that at the moment, the average UK worker works for a 39-hour week, we're really looking at them reducing that to below 35 hours. So really, I think even if you're doing like a 4.5 day week, that wouldn't quite cut it, because you really need to shave quite a lot off. So it really is more down to like about 32 hours, I would suggest. That's really what qualifies as the 4-day week. And actually now what the organisation is doing 4-day week, employers are now signing up to get accreditation to become 4-day week employers, and I think it's going to start to become actually a real competitive advantage. So this kind of gets into the why were people doing this, and what does it look like. So first of all, it's not just Fridays. That's the point that I wanted to make. So 32% of the companies went just for Friday, so where everybody takes the Friday off. But then you have staggered as well, so a quarter of the companies went for employees could choose to either have a Monday or have a Friday. Some went for a Wednesday or a Friday. And some went for, you just don't have the same day off. Like people just choose which day off they want. 7% had changes from week to week, and 9% went for a combination of full and half days. So it doesn't have to be the same pattern every week. And then there was also something called decentralized. So where you have in the larger companies, different departments or different teams would use different working patterns depending on what was needed. And then you've also got something called annualized as well. So for businesses that are maybe quite seasonal, for example, there was a restaurant whose business is highly seasonal. It might be that in those kind of key summer months when they're really busy, they maybe still did the 5, and then they actually reduced it and took the time back during the winter months. So all sorts of ways. One other one actually was conditional. So the 4-day work week being conditional on hitting certain measures, that had some issues and drawbacks, and we'll come to that when I come towards the end. When was it done? Last 6 months of 2022 is when the pilot was done. Which is why we're kind of hearing about it now. And then why? Why did these businesses choose to do it? Well, they wanted to be seen as trailblazers. They think this is coming anyway. A lot of people are saying that by around 2030, most companies will be doing a 4-day week. And so some companies just kind of want to get ahead of the curve. They think it's really good for recruitment and retention. And I think I'd have to agree with that based on the evidence. Some companies just have a real commitment to staff well-being, and they want to provide, some sort of the gift of time is one of the things that was created, right? They want to give employees the gift of time rather than kind of like other sort of like gimmicky rewards. They want a reward that was like really meaningful. And also they saw the 4-day work week as a very good alternative to permanent home working. So maybe for you, companies that are struggling to get that right balance of remote and in the office, and you're trying to get people back into the office, but it's like pulling teeth. This maybe is a good compromise, actually, moving to the 4-day week if you've got the right culture, and we'll come into that. Um, and so let's get into it then. The how. So let's get into how this was actually done. Preparation, right? So I've included that quote at the bottom, which anybody that's in project management will have seen that quote. The 6 P's: prior, proper, planning prevents poor performance. And actually, of the 70 companies that signed up to do the pilot, 9 actually dropped out even before the start of the 4-day week trial. And one of the reasons that was quoted was just that they, lack of preparation. They hadn't had time to do the preparation. So what the preparation looked like, there was 2 months, minimum of 2 months, of workshops with the external consultants, getting the staff into rooms to talk about processes, talking about the cultural change that was needed, really analysing the processes, measuring the processes, and deciding what was going to be measured when, once the 4-day week had been implemented, to make sure that things were going in the right way. Um, there was also the introduction of some new technology as well. So things like project management tools. So if you think about things like, say, Trello, if anybody's come across Trello, it's quite a common sort of project management tool. Trello was introduced in some companies, or other tools, to kind of help manage tasks. So really getting into some of the efficiencies here. So specifically, there were kind of like 8 specific steps that I'll run through in terms of the preparation. So staff submitting questions to create then an FAQ document, which is really important. Seeking legal advice on the terms and conditions during the pilot, right? So I know, again, a lot of companies think that they can just start it. Look, oh, we're just going to announce it and we're going to go to a 4-day week. But actually, no, seeking legal advice on, the terms and conditions during the pilot. And also, what happens if you decide that you're not going to go with the pilot? What does that mean in terms of terms and conditions? Surveying staff or consulting staff, so speaking to staff about their preferred model for implementing the 4-day week. So as I said, is it going to be everybody has Fridays off? Probably not practical for a lot of businesses. Is it going to be staggered? Is it going to be this? So surveying the staff. Creating an opt-in agreement for staff is something that some companies did to establish kind of almost like ground rules and like an etiquette. So, for example, what happens if there's an emergency on somebody's day off? Let's agree who's going to cover that, who's going to pick up the work. Auditing work processes. We talked about that, and developing new productivity initiatives. Introducing software to help staff see when others are working. So obviously, I know a lot of companies have MS Teams and they have things like Presence, but actually you might want other systems that almost like show the rota of who's in and when, so that you can plan, when you've got to collaborate or, work with other people, etc. And then also polling clients, so clients and customers, surveying clients and customers to get their opinions on the 4-day week and how it's going to potentially impact on them and what they do, so that you can then, sort of factor that into how it's best to operate. And then, as I said, developing the KPIs. So that was what the preparation looked like. So the efficiencies, in terms of, because here's the thing, how can you maintain productivity if you don't fundamentally change some of the ways that you work? So I've sort of broken it down. There was kind of like roughly 10 steps, and I've sort of broken it down. So time management, things like reworking your calendar so that it's more logical, so that things like, you're not constantly switching between different types of tasks, because switching is an inefficiency, right? So managing your calendar, reviewing your calendar at the end of the day. So, looking at the tasks that are coming ahead at the next day, either to do some sort of handover notes for a different team or somebody else that's coming in maybe the next day, or just for yourself. So this is about getting organized, so that when you then come in the next day, you're kind of like ready to go. And then do not disturb signs. I know this is something I've heard talked about, I want to say. at one of my companies. Hey, Belinda, good morning. Yeah, I know that you're Belinda. I'm gonna be getting you and your company on soon to talk about you moving to your fully remote system, which I can't wait to hear all about. But do not disturb signs is something I know a company I used to be at, which was they had massive open floor wings, and obviously what you often get in open floor offices, open plan offices, is that people just wander around to your desk and start talking to you. So I know there was a company that was going to implement a system of like a little flag that you would put on your desk to say, I'm doing focused work, don't disturb me. Okay, so do not disturb signs. Process improvement, so time and motion study, so actually starting to time certain activities that you really understand how long things take, so that you can then really target those activities that are taking a long time and see whether you can make some efficiencies. Um, the quote at the bottom there, do you really need to be in that meeting? Do you even need that meeting at all? Right, first of all, because something like 71% of people say that the meetings that they go into are not productive. So, first of all, do you even need the meeting? Secondly, who needs to be in the meeting? And it's the same with emails. Who needs to be on that email? So, getting really intentional about the purpose of an email, who needs to be involved, the purpose of meetings, who needs to be involved. Automation, so things like automatic filing of reports, email templates, automating customer service. Obviously we've got things now like ChatGPT and AI and all of that sort of stuff. So all of those automation tools were kind of used to help basically create some efficiencies. And then the final one in terms of how this is done, I've put it there as flex, but it's really flexibility, but I just kind of fancied using the word flex today on a Friday. Flexibility. So you've got to have these systems whereby, I think one of the companies actually talked about people just being willing to muck in and roll their sleeves up. So, particularly if you were staggered, and so there was a day when somebody might not be in, but something needs doing in their team, staff being prepared to roll their sleeves up and chip in just to kind of make this thing work across the organization. This goes back to the culture. If you've got the right sort of culture where people will want to make this work as a team because they all want the 4-day work week to be successful, you're more likely to get people chipping in and helping other teams out. So it's actually quite good for kind of like teamwork and, sort of like building bonds, basically. Okay, so the results. So what happened? What happened in the end? As is probably expected, employee well-being, is all the rage and it's all that's talked about. But what I found quite interesting in terms of revenue, so revenue as a proxy almost for productivity, and they didn't really say this in the report. The report could do, I am an accountant, so the report could do with a few more facts and figures for my liking, just in terms of so that you could really delve into the science of it. But they weren't able to measure productivity across all of the 61 companies because they were so different, but each company was measuring its own productivity, and they did report that there weren't productivity losses. But one thing that they could measure is they were measuring revenue, and they were comparing it to quite a few of the previous years. Obviously we've had COVID in the mix and all of that, but basically the companies reported on average broadly staying the same, but overall a 1.4% increase. I mean, some companies reported a significant increase, like sort of 35%. As to whether or not that was down to the 4-day week, who knows? It's really difficult to tell, really. But certainly things like well-being. So 39% of employees said they felt less stressed. 71% of employees surveyed felt less burned out, and we're hearing a lot about burnout. So other reports: lower anxiety, lower fatigue, reduced sleep issues, improved physical and mental health. 54% said it was easier to balance work with life outside of work. 60% found it easier to combine their care responsibilities with work, and also just to have a bit more of a social life. Because obviously, in that 5th day, so especially if it's a Friday or a Monday, you're getting like life admin done, rather than work stuff. Attrition, so the number of staff leaving fell by 57%. And you know what, even if you were to just factor that in as a cost, so we've talked about revenue, we haven't talked about margin, because actually, lower sickness, lower attrition, all of that has a real impact on profit. Yeah, so if you were to look at the profit, um, I'm guessing that the profit, not accounting for things like wage inflation, would have probably gone up on a like for like basis as well. So what was really interesting in terms of some of these quotes there, so I've got one at the bottom, but 70% of employees basically said they would need a higher salary of between 10 and 50% to go back to a full 5-day schedule. So they were like, we're sticking now with this 4-day schedule. 8% said they'd need more than 50% of a pay rise to go back to a 5-day week. And 15% of employees said there was no amount of money that could make them go back to a 5-day week, which I thought was incredibly interesting. 15% said no amount of money, I'm not going back to a 5-day week. So what were some of the risks and drawbacks? Because obviously, it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? But it was pretty much, to be honest. So first of all, the pilot dropout. So as I said, of the 70 that signed up for the pilot, 9 of them dropped out. And the reasons that they gave was preparation, so they hadn't had the time to do the workshops, to do the work, basically. And so I would really caution, if you're thinking about this, you can't just pick up and say, oh, from next week, we're all doing a 4-day. It just really is not like that. And also, I would say, don't underestimate the importance of the efficiencies, because if you don't have those efficiencies baked in, I don't think you're going to deliver anywhere near those productivities. You are going to start to see productivity decline and ultimately your revenue decline if you don't put the preparation in. So, people did drop out of the pilot. And also, then of the 61 companies that stayed in the pilot, only 56 of them have said they are continuing with it. And certainly as of the time of writing the report, which was around the end of January, only 18 companies said they were definitely making it permanent, right? So I don't want to oversell this as like the nirvana that everybody needs to go to. It still needs some work. One of the things I think is really important is the culture that you have already and the culture that you sustain. So a culture of trust is so important. It's much easier, I think, for businesses where you measure everything anyway. So if the business is heavily driven by KPIs, so that you're effectively monitoring activity and outputs, and it's just the norm, it's probably easier to do this anyway, because you can quickly see whether things are going off track, where they're going off track. The only thing I would caution is the employees that had the most sort of like negative comments about how this had gone were in companies where, for example, they had said that the 4-day work week was conditional, as in, conditional on, if you've hit X, Y, and Z, then you can have the 5th day off. It didn't sit well with some employees, and I'm not sure they necessarily saw the same level of, employee engagement and satisfaction and happiness as a result of it. The other thing in terms of the culture, and when I say about, and this kind of links into the 5th day rules, some organisations weren't bothered what people were doing on their 5th day. So if you think about it, if you step back and think about it, on their 5th day, especially, we're in a cost of living crisis, some people could go out and get a second job and freelance. And so some organisations weren't bothered what their employees did on their 5th day. It was like, knock yourself out. If you want to lay in bed all day, lay in bed all day. If you want to go and get a second job, go and get a second job. Some companies were what they've termed more interested in what they were doing, and a bit more directional. So maybe they'd say, we'd encourage you to maybe take on some volunteering, or, go and take on some personal development, or, whatever it might be. And then some were like, right, contractually, you cannot take on a second job, right? So again, it depends on what your culture is like, basically. But I think if you're thinking about this, just start having conversations with your management and leadership teams about that. What would our expectation be of what people are doing on that 5th day? Because it will probably give you an indication as to whether you're actually a good fit. The other thing I would say about the culture as well, one of the issues, and it is an issue, was that there were some employees did report that they were taking work home in the evenings. So, do you have a culture of real openness where, if maybe somebody is struggling or it's not working for them, are they going to speak up? Or are they just going to start to suffer? And are they actually going to really just be working that fifth day? And then you've almost got this faux success, as I call it, where people are pretending that this thing's worked, but it hasn't really worked. So you've got to have a real kind of culture of openness and transparency. And if you haven't already got that kind of openness, transparency, trust, this may or may not be the thing for you. Or certainly, I guess in that preparation phase, you would have to sort of like make a lot of effort to make sure that you had the right culture in place. So that's it. It really has been a complete canter kind of gallop through the results of the study. So in terms of where you can find more information, drop me a DM if you're interested in finding out more about it. I'm not an expert in it. I am an expert in transformation and process improvement and, diversity and inclusion and how companies work and working with leadership teams. I do all of that sort of stuff, but I'm not professing to be an expert in the 4-day work week. But drop me a DM, if you want to see more of my notes. So I've obviously got way more detailed notes than I've shared in the slides. But yeah, I'm keen to kind of see what your thoughts are on whether you are actually thinking about doing this as a company. Please do feel free to share this, this live stream link with your leadership team. So maybe if your leadership team are thinking about it, share this with them so that they start to get excited. What I'll try to remember to do if I get time today is share a link to the report that I was referencing. More notes, please. Belinda, definitely. I'll send you some more notes and I'll link the report. It's quite a lengthy report, which is kind of why I've sort of done this service of kind of like distilling it, because it is pretty lengthy. And I do think it needed a little bit more rigor, but I'm not gonna sort of go into that. I'm gonna take my accountant's hat off for 2 seconds. But yeah, if you want more of the notes, please do get in touch. The company that produced the report is called Autonomy. It's not the easiest report to find, so I will try to leave the links. And that's it. I just really, encourage you to look into it if it's something that you think your culture would be a fit for. I do think more organisations can take advantage of it than you think. If a construction company can do it, housing association of 250 people, an organisation of 1,000 people. Some of the latest companies that are thinking of doing it, Sainsbury's. I think Morrison already do this in some teams on a staggered basis. Dunelm are now saying that they're doing it. So it's definitely possible. So that's it. That's all I'm going to leave you with. I hope it's been really useful. Have an amazing weekend. Obviously, if you're doing a 4-day work week and you have Fridays off, maybe you've already started the weekend. So good for you. So again, I'd love to hear from companies that are doing this to see what some of the pitfalls have been. So that's it. Yeah. So it just leaves me to say, as always, go with grace and take care. All right. That's me. Peace out.